Welcome to our podcast today. Ask Aaron and Ask EJ. This is Coach Eric Johnson, the brand.
And this is Coach Aaron Thigpen, the source. EJ, today's topic. Um, I don't know. Maybe we'll call it Let's Get Physical.
You know what? Olivia Newton-John,
Yeah.
great.
I couldn't remember her name, so I'm glad you picked me up on that one.
Some 80s and some tights and some headbands.
Yeah.
Let's get physical, man. Yes, the
And
battle cry.
and what I mean by that is I'm having these ever increasing conversations with parents about um not just the lack of physicality, which is maybe what you might want to call the structural build of an athlete, but also the lack of physical expression, if you know what I mean. In other words, kids tend to either sometimes be, or athletes in general, tend to be a little bit more reserved or timid or I don't know if that's the right word, but they're not aggressive, or they're not fully kind of expressing themselves physically when they're doing things.
Right.
And I think part of that comes from, how the kids are raised nowadays, the lack of play, unstructured recreational physical activity, things like that, and as well as the inserting them into organized, structured training and skill-based things early on. So I think you're more willing to express yourself physically when you've been able to explore those limits,
Mm,
you know,
yeah.
early on in your, adolescent life, And again, it doesn't necessarily mean through sport, but it could just mean climbing a tree, riding a skateboard,
Mhm.
riding a bike,
Right.
those sorts of things, And you're on the bike. What are you doing? You're jumping the curb. You're popping wheelies,
Right.
things
Right.
like that. And that's one reason why I always tend to like skateboarders
Right.
because they have, I guess, in that sport or in that activity, there's a willingness or an innateness to be creative with how you're moving and expressing your body physically. And so I think through that exploration, that's how they get better. And that's how you see their tricks get even better and their tricks get even more, complicated and
Right.
things like that. And yeah, they go through the bumps and the bruises and the broken bones and the falls, but it doesn't stop them from continuing to push the boundaries of their physicality and exploring how they're expressing that, in their given
Mhm.
activity or sport, if we want to call it. And I just think that's lacking with kids because kids don't throw, they don't take the tennis ball and throw it off the garage door for an hour. They don't, you know,
Right.
they don't throw the ball up in the air as high as they can and try and catch it by themselves.
Right.
They're not out playing street tag. All of those things that kind of, where you're playing street tag and you're doing all these juke moves not to get tagged, and all of these are kind of
Right.
they're expressions of physicality that you transfer in the sport. You don't see kids outside wrestling on the lawn. A lot of
Right.
kids feel, I don't see them, they shy from contact unless they're in a contact sport,
Right.
So these are just all things that I'm seeing, and I'm trying to figure out ways to institute that in the training, but I just don't think there's no substitute um, for that because, again, even in baseball, I'm sure you've got guys who you're like, okay, you got to swing the bat now. And they'll swing it and they might do it correctly, but it's like, okay, well, let's put something into it now. you know?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
maybe because
Right.
they're handcuffed with all of the information that's been poured into them, they can't just let go anymore. So anyway, that's kind of what I'm talking about.
Okay.
That ability to get up on it and lean on somebody and go and all those sorts of things that athletes require. I mean, sport is war. And so there is a level of aggression, I think, controlled aggression that athletes need to be successful because you're trying to dominate.
Right. 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 Wow, that's a lot to take in, man. You brought some good points. Your last point's awesome. Sport is war. Something I've used a lot in the last 3 years to our athletes. This is a competition, it's a war. And the reason why I say that, and the reason why I think you mentioned that, is that we have the structured athlete versus the unstructured athletes. And I'll take those unstructured athletes all day. Those are the skateboarders. Those kids that just play tackle football with no pads on out in the high school
Street.
field, and
Yep.
they're just getting after it, right? I mean, do we have a whole bunch of outdoor versus indoor kids?
Yeah.
We have structured, okay, we got a play date now. Well, our play date was knock on the door. Hey, you want to come on play, man? Let's go. That was your play date. And when the street lights went off, you came home. You just knew that's that's when you were supposed to come home. Now it's like, where do we see kids riding bikes anymore? I
Yeah.
mean, they have all these e-bikes now, right? The electronic bikes, right? And so they can go up to 20 to 48 miles per hour, and the kids like that. But all of a sudden, oh, you don't have a helmet on? Oh, you can't go out and play like that anymore. I'm gonna take your e-bike away. What do it's so much structure and so many rules. We're not allowing our players, our athletes to play free.
Yeah.
There's no freedom anymore. And that's why this expressionism, as you call it, expression of an athlete. And I think of track athletes all the time when I see this. My favorite thing about the Olympics is watching all the athletes express themselves in their events. Like it's the most amazing thing. Like, did you see that person and you watch them and they did that? That was cool. And we don't see it anymore because first of all, the old establishment, and let's talk about baseball, old establishment. Oh, you can't run around the bases and show your teammates up like that. I get that. Okay, there's a lot to that. And then the new era, hit the ball, do your party dance, do your bat flip, get the third base, hit your jump shot, and then tag the coach's hand and go home and all this stuff at the plate express themselves to a certain degree to let people know that they are human. And I don't see where's the human side of an athlete these days that express themselves. If they're alt structure, they don't know how to. It's like, oh, don't do that. That's not the right way. But is that really the right way? Are we putting handcuffs on our athletes to where they can't express themselves anymore because they're not? And you know what? You mean you can't get physical after you do something like you run in your training? You go, yeah, I did it. What's wrong with that? Oh, don't do that. You're showing the other athletes in the complex up. No, you're not. You're doing something that makes you feel good. And I think you're right. I think, you know, athletes don't know how to express themselves. And when they get physical, it's like they're a bunch of robots.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I mean, I don't know what the answer is to that. I tend, when I talk to parents, I'll say, hey, put them in some sports where recreation, like for instance, I was talking to my therapist because I'm
Okay.
doing my shoulder rehab for my rotator cuff. And she has a 4-year-old. Like, yeah, he's playing t-ball and they do this and they do that. And then when it comes to hit off the tee, doesn't really, swing the bat hard. And I said, he's only 4, so he got one grasp the concept. But I just said, get him into activities where he can be aggressive in a controlled environment. and it's okay. And there's gonna be they're gonna they're gonna be ways where they, teach him what's appropriate aggression and what's inappropriate aggression. And so
Right.
she has them in jujitsu. I said, it's perfect.
That's awesome.
So martial arts, I like jujitsu because there's a physical contact that you got to get comfortable with, being up close with your opponent and rolling around and, all of those sorts of
Right.
things, wrestling. Um, but there's sports where where aggression, you need a certain level of aggression because you have to dominate your opponent, but there's guide rules and norms and, rules and procedures that kind of let you know, hey, this is appropriate, this is inappropriate, and it
Right.
keeps it in check. And so I'm steering a lot of athletes towards that sort of thing. And also it's a degree of mental toughness. And maybe that's why some of these kids don't express themselves
Okay.
physically, because maybe there's not that degree of mental toughness that allows them to be able to do that as well, where they feel comfortable doing that. So, I mean, that's one of the answers, I give. Maybe even something like gymnastics. You can't
Right.
half-ass do a backflip because you're gonna get hurt, you know? Uh,
Right.
but something like some of these other sports, like maybe basketball
Hmm.
or baseball, you can kind of finesse your way, and maybe that's why the three-point shot is so
Right.
is 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 the go-to for a lot of kids now because hey, I can score, but I don't have to get down and dirty by driving to the lane and I don't have to bump bodies and you know what I'm saying?
Right.
I don't have to get physical. I don't have to worry about getting hurt if I'm that sort of athlete. I don't know,
Yeah.
but that's kind of, what's going through my mind and I just think that sort being comfortable with how you're expressing yourself with your body starts early on
Hmm.
and parents need to be conscious of that because just like if you tell a kid he's fat at 4 years old you
Right.
develop a complex for that. So maybe the same thing needs to happen on the good side, when a kid is being physical at four
Right.
and not slapping his hand and saying, hey, that's wrong, Johnny, don't do that. Say, hell no, Johnny, this is how we do that aggressively versus
Right.
just saying, hey, we don't do that or that's wrong or whatever. So I don't know. But again, I'm getting the kids who can't do it and they're having a hard time going to the next level. And so they're getting outplayed by other kids who can.
I think you said something valuable there. You said the degree of mental toughness. It's lacking, I feel, in athletes, and I'll tell you why I feel it's lacking. The ability to use this word is kind of like offensive. Attack. When you hear attack, that's a war. That's a war word. And I think in athletics, people need to understand attack means aggressive. It doesn't mean, oh, it's a bad connotation to
Yeah.
something. And our athletes these days, I feel that's not being maybe practiced at home about competitive spirit. Like I believe athletes lack competitive spirit, and that's a way to express themselves. You said expression. Expression is about attack mode. Expression is about how athletes feel about themselves and their teammates to be aggressive and in all athletic ventures. I don't care if it's equestrian. That rider is attacking that jump with that horse.
Mhm.
I mean, you start to think about that. That's expression right there. Like, hey, and I think, like you said, there are certain rules and guidelines and stuff, but all the best athletes in any sport are aggressive, have physical expression. always on the attack mode. I think of Steph Curry, who changed the game of basketball forever. He's a icon in basketball. The game changed because of his 3-point shot. But can I tell you something? Steph Curry was getting banged on that 3-point line, and he had to go get physical. He had to go get physical because he wasn't that big, and they were pounding him. He was getting hurt, but he was aggressive. You know, whether he was bumping guys, stepping back, and shooting, there's a level of physicality there that allows you to know, though he changed the game, and people think, oh, I'll just go be like Steph Curry. I'll sit by the line, they'll pass me the ball, and I just shoot it. No, that's not true. So I think you make a really great point, that attacking something's important.
Uh,
So
that's my 2 cents, 5 cents, 10 cents on that. But food for thought, parents.
yeah,
Um, you know, watch your kids, kind of see what that, their sport personality is, and if that physical component, that physical expression component is in there, and try and foster it for them, so that they can again continue to improve and enjoy the sport, and move up in to the levels that they want.
love it. Well, that wraps up our podcast today. Ask Aaron and ask EJ. This is Coach Eric Johnson, the brand, signing out.
And this is Coach Aaron Thigpen, the source. We'll see you.